Well, hello, this is the final boss, and this is Measured Deceptions. One of my colleagues, friends, sent this over, and I'm really excited to read it. This is his first kind of, I think, draft, focus on a novel, and I'm, yeah, curious to take a look at what, someone's been working on. It's always amazing to see someone do a passion project and really bring, kind of build something of their own completely on their own. So I'm always really excited to jump in. Anyways, on that note, let's jump in. Prelude. So the only thing that I would say is prelude is just kind of not what I would generally expect. Usually, like I think of it prologue, something like that. I don't think it's really the end of the world, but it's something to keep an eye on. Is am I using terminology that is understandable to my reader from the get go? Prelude seems to kind of lean in the opposite direction. Not the end of the world, but something to keep an eye out. December 2019, cloaked Shawstone, Oregon in a shroud of mist and uncertainty. I like that. I think you should cut Can I do like this? Whoa, cool. Share your file to collaborate in real time. What if I just save it as my edits? Can I do that? Can I do that? Jeff edits. Bango, bango, bungo. All right. So yeah, so I think the reason I'm cutting uncertainty um, is it's a bit telling, and it's also very hard to visualize, right? Like if you're starting, with a wide shot, right? Like it's essentially thinking of one of your options in an opening is to think of it very much like film, right? Like when you see a movie starts in a wide shot. I mean, this is essentially starting in a wide shot, and then you'll eventually zoom in on the subject of the story. You have other movies that start with like a close up where someone's, bah, bah, and they're in a fight or something, and then it will zoom out to give the context, right? So because we're kind of essentially starting in a wide shot, uncertainty is a bit of a telling aspect, and it's also trying to lead the reader into feeling uncertainty without it necessarily being um, like ready in the scene yet, right? Like I think the Shroud of Mist is starting that process, but I think uncertainty and those types of things aren't quite there yet. I don't think we're, I guess, ready for it in the scene. So yeah, cut uncertainty. It's a bit telling on what you want the reader to feel before the scene is ready to make me feel that on its own. I think it's, trusting eventually, that these elements like mist and kind of the way you're describing, and you're even just the fact that you're starting from a wide shot gives us that sense of uncertainty without us having to like put a stake on it and say, hey, this is uncertainty. The air was crisp, biting at the exposed skin of those who dared to wander the cobblestone streets, their breaths visible in their cold, like fleeting ghosts. The town, with its quaint coffee shops and Victorian storefronts, buzzed with the everyday life of its residents, unaware of the storm brewing at the heart of Promissary Pharmaceuticals. Yeah, I think So one, it, I really like just the writerly descriptive language. I think is great. Um, and it depends on your goals as a writer, right? Like this, I think is a push and pull. I think you're using some really great descriptive language. Um, it's showing sort of what you can do in prose, which is very worth showing. The con, I think, is that if this is going to be more of a tension story, like if this is going to be more like kind of like a thriller type story, you know, anything that's slowing down the pacing, especially early on, even if it's a good thing, is still a risk because it's slowing down the pacing. And so I think this is one of those areas where I would just double check and say, are you cool with the effect this is having? Like it will slow down your pacing somewhat, but it also brings in some nice imagery and paints a really pretty picture. Those don't necessarily always have to be at odds, but I do think we're kind of on the fence in terms of the trade-off with this one here. Let me make one adjustment to the stream thing. There we go. All right. Beedly boop. All right. But this extra description will slow scene pacing. And you know, in that first page, like pacing is pretty. You, you want to be pretty thoughtful about, hey, it needs to really be pulling its weight in order to, you know, slow down my first page's pacing. The town is quaint coffee shops and Victorian storefronts, but with everyday life of its residents, and when the storm brewing at Promissary Pharm, a little bit telling. I wonder if there's a way to show this. You know, like what if there's a, you know, a drifter that comes into town, and because the pharmaceuticals are doing something, he like dies at the edge of town, unaware of like the, you know, this person having an active effect, like this person, you know, unaware that Joe the, you know, the garbage man took a deep breath of the fumes coming out of Promissary Pharmaceuticals, and immediately his garbage truck started veering off the road and he slammed into a tree. They thought he was drunk. They were wrong. I hear a child crying. 1 second. I do. I will be right back. My little one is fussing. Thankfully, just a bottle replacement. He's happy. All right. So yeah. So I think that like the biggest thing I would flag is first paragraph, and I know I'm zooming in really, really close on the first paragraph. It's just I think best practice to do so. Um, First paragraph I think has really great descriptive language. The sentence structure is really good. There's a lot of the things that you want to see. I am already seeing a little bit of a trade-off in terms of describing or trying to lead with like, hey, what the reader should be experiencing by just sort of saying, hey, you should feel uncertainty. There's something going on here, rather than showing and making those feel uncertainty ourselves, right? So there's that line of how do I describe the scene in a way, use the language in a way that it gives unease to the reader without me having to say, hey, you should feel uneasy. And similar thing with the, you know, unaware of this pharmaceuticals group being up to something. Is there a in-scene way we can start evoking that without having, you know, to zoom out to summary, right? Because every time you go into summary and you're sort of saying, hey, it just compresses everything and zooms out the story. And I think there's a place and a time for summary. But usually this kind of initial chapter, initial page, unless there's like especially given the way we're starting, like kind of starting on a wide shot, we're coming in on a scene, we're starting to like zero in on what's going on, right? We went from Shawstone, Oregon. The air was crisp, the weather, the town, the quaint shops, the residents, and then we're back out to Promissary Pharmaceuticals is up to something. And like that, like zooms us back out to the wide shot, and so that would jar any, you know, sort of progression of how we're going into the story. So a few reasons why I kind of would raise a hand there and just say, hey, take an extra look, make sure it's aligning with your goals as a writer. Is there a way? All right. Small town with a dramatic cliffs and a powerful embrace the Columbus. So now we're back in like a wide shot, right? So we're kind of like the camera's like zooming in on the town, and then now we're back to like the big picture of the scene, right? And so I think some of these things you might want to be looking at cutting, like, okay, yeah, we kind of have like this sense of nature from this other sentence up here. Do we need this extra bit? I like that we're touching on all the senses, right? We have smell, we have color, we have sound. I think I saw. So that's really, really, really good. We have, yeah, smell. I think, but then we're also verbal doubling, right? We have another mention of, hey, something's up. So in this sense, it feels like we're just kind of repeating that same plot beat. Trust your writing, right? Like, I think you're doing a great job writing. I think this is, a strong opening, but repeating it will weaken it, right? Start saying, hey, like, trust that I got it, right? Once we knew that something's brewing in the heart of pharmaceuticals, all this stuff, let's just get to pharmaceuticals. We don't want to go back out to a wide shot and zoom in on another thing. That's like, yeah, P2. We're recapping something that's already in the first, few sentences. All right. In the world of medicine, the stakes were high. Promissary, the pharmaceutical center, towered over the quaint town. I think I would just say like Promissary Pharmaceuticals. Uh, yeah, just say Promissary Pharmaceuticals towered. I think is all you really need there. It's on the brink of something extraordinary. I guess that with that it doesn't really track, but um, it's on the brink of something extraordinary, giving me a symbol of hope. Um, Stood as a gleaming symbol of hope in molten modern glass facade reflecting the golden rays of the sun. Inside, however, the pulse of ambition thriving like a living creature, restless. Again, nicely described, but it is a little bit telling. So again, kind of running into P2, still a little telly in our description. Consider, moving straight into a scene. Rather than staying. And it's one of those things where it really does come down to your goals as a writer when I think about scene and summary, right? You look at different times in writing, summary was more popular, right? Like, even in Lord of the Rings, there is a narrator summarizing what's going on, In the hole in the ground there lived the hobbit. It wasn't a nasty hole in the ground. There's some storyteller being the interface between us and the story, right? More often recently, we're just straight into um, we're straight into like the scenes of the story, right? Because more modern writing has drawn a lot on filmmaking. So I'll give you an example if that's helpful. Let me just pull up literally just a more recent book on in Amazon. No, is this not going to work? Okay, that's not going to work. Let me pull up Kindle then. So let's see. A book. Blood over Brighthaven. That is, popular common book. Popular common. But it's a popular book that's been written recently. Um, So again, this is starting right in. Tamil had taken the long way back from scouting. Against his better judgment, he let down his wolfskin hood and welcomed the wind's needles as he pressed through the howling dark. Tamil's gods were in his cold, and they were in the snow and the crocus stem of color. If this was the last time they were ever wrapped their arms around him, he wanted to feel it. So again, we know that there's some danger, like, because we're in his interior thoughts. We know that he's like, if this is the last time, there must be some sort of occasion for this being at risk. But we're zooming in right on a character, right in how they're experiencing a scene. Again, so like if you think about it in film terms, there's a boom, we're starting on a close up, like, it's windy and he has his hood up. And yeah, and I think you're okay starting on a wide shot. But with a lot of the modern writing leaning into scene so much more than summary, um, you do want to be pretty aware of, hey, your audience is already quite prepared for something that's going to be pretty heavy on scene. And so when you are using a more summary based approach, it's just probably not going to hit as cleanly. But anyways, I'm going to keep reading. I think I've given enough kind of commentary on scene and summary. I'll call out a few things, but I'm not going to go into as much detail about that, and I'll try to get through as much as I can. Anyways, in the world of promissory secrets, recurrency, Peter Jerhoff, again, a little bit telly. A rising CEO, comma, need a comma there, knew he would have to make choices that would reverberate far beyond the sterile labs and polished boardrooms. I just kind of want to see one of these choices. Again, we're starting in such a wide shot and we're staying like really pulled back. I would try to get in to the moment by moment of the scene as soon as you can. This man a vision of determination. He had carved his path through the cutthroat corporate world with an unwavering belief that his team could create a life-saving drug that would transform medicine as it was known. A breakthrough that could cure diseases long thought to be incurable. Each night he stood at the expansive windows of his office, gazing over the sweeping panorama of the Columbia, contemplating the weight of his responsibilities. So one question, and I don't know, I haven't read the next paragraphs. So one option though, right, is like this is more of a close-up shot. So like one way you could sort bring us in a little bit more actively, maybe we're, starting on this close-up shot of him. Again, I would be looking for a moment to start that already has some conflict baked in, right? The end of the first paragraph in Blood over Brighthaven, there is an implication that something life and death is happening right now, right? I can go back to another book. Let's see. And again, yeah, this is going to be modern fiction, right? It's going to, go a little different, go a little harder. Will of the Many. That was a popular book recently. The Hierarchy series. Yes. Yes. So, this one starts, I am dangling, and it is only my father's blood-slicked grip on my wrist that stops me from falling. He's on his stomach, stretched out over the rocky ledge. His muscles are corded. Sticky red covers his face, his arms, his clothes, everything I can see. Yet I know he can pull me up. I do everything I can not to struggle. I trust him to save me. So that's paragraph 1 and 2, right? So we're starting, boom, there is something going down right now. And that is, just kind of a modern fantasy trope. Again, this doesn't seem, fantasy, so it is obviously in more literary fiction okay to start a little bit pulled back in terms of pacing. But yeah, drugs are hitting the marketplace faster than companies can keep up with. Promissary is and always has been to provide the best quality medicine at an affordable cost. A new lab is currently in development off-site just outside the cliffs overlooking the water. A state-of-the-art facility, more than 30,000 square feet, which allowed the company to generate 2 times as fast. 2x, like using numbers like this, I would just think through how you're using numbers as numerics or numbers as written out. There's kind of debate on both sides. More often, you will find folks arguing to write out things that aren't dates. So if it's 30,000, it would be, to, something like that. But whatever you're doing, try to be consistent. It looks like you're kind of already consistently just shortening them into the numerics, which is fine. Twice is better. Number break words and can be effective, but yeah, but use sparingly. Sour Haggis, welcome. Long time no see. And thank you for joining in. I'm noticing also that your chat, is it showing up? Is it showing up? No, it is not. Because this is in front of it. Now it should show up. But yeah, twice is better. Number break words can be effective, but use sparingly. Exactly. Yeah. A new drug that is currently in development, named Heligen, is at the focal point of the business. A life-saving drug that can reverse the effects of some of our most deadly diseases that claim many lives. But with the power comes great division. The political side of the issue has divided the company just before its big release. So the one thing I would caution is this, is really, really pulled back in summary. And this is the first moment we're getting in. Even if I read something probably more, yeah, I mean, even if you think of like a literary classic like Charles Dickens, right? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. That, he gets straight to like the big scene of like the wine bursting in the street and everyone's drinking it out of the ground, and it's kind of this very visceral, using a really intense moment to imply all the stuff going on, right? And so that's what I would encourage is how do you represent all these ideas you're telling us in a moment, in a summary moment, like, right? Like, and I think, again, Dickens is Dickens, so like the example that he does, yeah, he has a bit of summary. He was a Victorian writer. They loved summary. Again, different audience, an audience that wanted poetic summary, that wanted a narrator to come in and kind of open the story. Less common now. But for Dickens, even then, what's the promise you're making to the reader? Exactly, right? But even with a promise of summary, he starts with, best of times, worst of times. He knows that his goal is, I need to make the reader understand how desperate things are getting in France. It's bad. It's not good. Like there's a reason why, the government's about to kind of collapse and it's going to be this crazy thing. And he says that, everybody's broke. Every merchant's broke on the street except the wine merchant, except the Defarges, because the only thing people want to spend any of their remaining money on is to get drunk. It's a really good indicator, right? So he's setting up these suggestions in terms of the staging of the scene so that it's telling you all this stuff while you're watching kind of this really, like, and it's one of the big scenes in literature, right, where the wine casks break, there's wine everywhere, people are drinking it from the streets, and of course, because it's foreboding what's to come, it's all red wine, and people look like they're soaked in blood, and they're putting wine in their caps. And so, it's very, very efficient, even in Victorian writing when they liked summary, to have a moment of scene that is typifying of all the other things going on. So is there in this pharmacy a decision that can be made, a moment inside the pharmacy where these truths about what's going on at the pharmacy are coming to a point where we can kind of see them and imply this bigger structure, right? Those would be the things to think about. Anyways, everything appears, I know I've been talking a lot about scene and summary, but I do think it is, I think the writing, honestly, the sentence structure is solid. And I think the thing that is slowing the read is kind of just the scene structure, right? Like there's just not, there's not as much conflict. It's just always the pacing is gonna get drained the more we stay in summary, and we're staying in it for quite a while. Led to bitter rivals, the pulse of the company quickened. The pulse of the company quickened, and so did the ripples of deceit, manipulation. Shadowy figure emerged from the periphery. No one seemed to know much worse. The atmosphere thickened, and Peter found himself caught in a web of alliances that could turn him in an instant. In Shawstone, where the cliffs whispered secrets to the river below, Peter was about to learn that every decision echoed, reverberating through the lives of those around him and the very fabric of the world itself. Peter knew that his path ahead would be determined. The deeper they go, the more these characters will learn the twisted secrets of this seemingly peaceful town that has a haunting past. So I guess this is kind of like, it's interesting. Maybe the prelude is sort of a, maybe it is kind of like the best of times, worst of times, where you're kind of drawing a picture of, um, what's going on in this town and the pharmaceutical company, and foreshadowing what's going on. The encouragement I would again say is, I'm really curious to read now that I think we're getting into the more scene stuff here. When I think about the prelude, I would really, really ask. I think one could be shorter. There's a few times it's repeating itself, and when you think about preludes like this, they're generally very, very quick, right? So I would, the best case would be, how do you make this as short as the prelude in Tale of Two Cities, before it gets into the scene, right? The wine shop and the wine spill. Or um, do you want to shorten this to something that's more like a Star Wars scroll screen, like ba ba da ba 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 ba, and then the text starts rolling, but it's only like 3 or 4 paragraphs, and then boom, there's a space battle, like, so it's food for thought, right? Like, those, like, think about these other examples where people have done preludes, where people have done these kind of summary lead-ins, and they're very economical. I don't think this is quite as economical as it needs to be if that's your goal. Chapter 1, the beginning. Shawstone, Oregon, December 2019. I always thought I would be in the same room when my wife told me she was pregnant. Peter was sitting in the back of the car, resting his eyes for when he heard the driver mumble something. He wasn't paying attention. Maybe it was the sound of the rain hitting the roof of the car that created the sound of a vacuum-like hum. It's a little clunky. I would just, highlight it. Can I highlight it? That seems like there's something going on there. This is page 4. The sound of is a little clunky. Rephrase. In Oregon, the middle of December is a time when the air is fresh, but the rain is agonizing and never quits. Never seems to quit. I don't know. I think that's fine. I'm always of the mind, when it comes to like little sentence choices like this, shorter the better, and then getting your base clause as close as you can to the main verb, right? The verb here that matters is quit, right? And then seems to is essentially just an infinitive, just slowing it down. So that's a very nitpicky thing. I don't think it's really going to make much of a difference, but it is something to think about when you get into your revisions and you sort of say, how do I get the base clause to be the most meaningful? Like that subject verb, like he ran, she jumped, they dove, door closed, lights went out. Like, those two, like subject verb, blah, blah, blah. And obviously there's a lot more to a sentence, but if those subject verbs are really well chosen, they will carry a lot of momentum without you having to do as much work with all the other stuff in the sentence. Not sure if you heard me. I said, I always thought I'd be in the same room when my wife told me she was pregnant. This time the driver looked back at Peter to make sure he heard him. Peter stopped massaging the outside of his eyelids, trying to relieve tension in his head. I don't think we need to know this. I think we know when people are massaging their eyelids, they are not happy. The bulging pain seemed to soften an ache the harder he would apply pressure. The bulging pain seemed to soften. This is applied. Again, we're having another seem to. The bulging pain softened the harder he applied pressure. Um, Again, like it's that subject verb stuff that I do think can start adding up and mattering quite a bit. This time, the words of the driver were much more distinct. It forced him to look up and engage. That moment, his cell phone rang. His timing was neither perfect nor great. However, time was of the essence to answer the phone call. Why is it not great? I feel like he doesn't want to talk to the driver. He doesn't want to talk to the driver. A call interrupting seems like great timing. When we get a conclusion like this, hint at the, source emotion. Is he relieved he doesn't have to talk to the driver? Was he actually looking forward to talking to the driver and kind of getting his mind off work? Those are the kind of the hints that can give us a lot of these contexts. The meal was eaten by the dog ate the meal. Yep. Yes, passive and active voice, similar kind of, yes, absolutely. Beware. I mean, again, it's one of those things. There's never a hard and fast, never ever ever use it, but it's usually like when you're using passive voice or when you're pulling the base clause, the meaning out of the base clause of a sentence, you need to be really, really intentional and like knowing I'm doing this for this reason. Like, there's a lot of times you will stack a sentence, right, to build tension. Like, like you're like, um, out of the city, over the hill, below the bench, through the garden. That's how far so and so ran. Like because you're building like and it you're building tension at the sentence level, right? Is subterfuge in dialogue. Say one thing, insinuate another. Exactly, right? And so there is a lot of opportunity to like use these tools. I don't think it's ever like, hard and fast. Never use passive voice, but it is very well worth making sure you're when you're using, it's sort of like you don't want to hit every, you want to use a screwdriver, not a hammer type thing. You want to know when you're banging something with a screwdriver, and it might not be the best tool for the job, right? The moment cell phone rang, time is neither perfect nor great. It's the essence. Maybe he can't hear me, the driver whispered to himself. I said, listen, I'm sorry, I'm just a little tired at the moment. It's hard to hear right now. Peter looked down his office was calling. So again, it feels like we're kind of restating again. Like I'm finding that some of like the moments in the scene and even in the summary before, another verbal doubling. We're kind of rehashing the same moment a few times. Like we once the beat is expressed, you know, trust that it got across to the reader. Yeah, because like I mean, even before I read this extra back and forth, it was pretty clear that he's trying to distance from the driver. I thought he would kind of use that phone call as an excuse, but anyways. Hello, yes, put it on, please. Peter here, the front desk attendant, working between calls. Look, just tell the board I need to speak to them tonight. I got off the phone with Osta. We need to pause production at the lab. I'll explain more once I arrive. Once I arrive. And can you tell I'm getting old and tired and I've been chasing kids all day? I'm heading back to the office now. I should be back in. Thinking there's an extra period there. Hey, excuse me. Yeah, hi. Sorry. Do you know what our ETA is looking like, Peter asked the driver? Um, I would make this a new paragraph. So this is a good, just like general, like, so now that he's changing who he's talking to, you can either make it a new paragraph, you can add an action line essentially, where, so we're starting this right with like, I got to do all this. I just got off the phone. This is all one big chunk of dialogue. And then you could close this dialogue, in quotes. Peter wrapped his knuckle on the driver's glass window in the limo. Hey, excuse me. Yeah, hi. Do you know what our ETA is looking like? Peter asked the driver. And then this should be definitely a new paragraph. So I would be, because now that there's another subject talking, it should definitely be a new paragraph. So yeah, P4 end. This is page 4 on the Adobe Acrobat document. Um, Maybe I'll just use the Adobe things. I don't know. Whatever is the best. Um, you know, dialogue could be restructured. Yeah, and so a lot of like the point of like, being so obsessive, and I know everyone's like, gosh, Jeff, we know, but being so obsessive about paragraphy and how you're structuring these things is it will save a lot of mental effort for the reader if you're just really, really consistent. You pick the way you're doing it, um, and it'll just help the reader spend more time just being immersed in the story rather than having to take a moment to sort of be like, okay, this person's talking to this person now. Oh, this is the reply from somebody else. Like those types of things are where just building the great setup for an air of menace for the driver. Yeah. Oops. Get out of here, AI assistant. You could hear everything Peter was saying between observing him through the rearview mirror and keeping his eyes on the road. Whoever was at the end of that call was someone important. Outside, the car winds were strong. They were driving at Route 47. A busy highway tucked. I like this. I think this is great. A great like pull out. So again, another tricky thing is omniscient narrators always are really tricky. So whenever you're head jumping, you're doing a good job, I think, in this instance. But you obviously it can be again disorienting unless there's like a really good structure that everyone recognizes. A lot of stories will have one of those little three dots. We'll say, okay, it's a different perspective, same scene. Whatever that is. Or you can be like, I know Miss Dalloway, Virginia Woolf, she's jumping between everyone's heads all over the place. Um, but she's also being very, very, very thoughtful about how she does it, right? And so if you do I know it's like more of a nerdy book, but if you do read, it's not. I wouldn't even recommend. It's not that great of a book. It's just very well written, which is in my mind a different thing. But um, yeah, for like Miss Dalloway, you'll see Virginia Woolf kind of sort of like that camera thing, right? Like she'll zoom into zoom in scene action, like hey, it's rainy. This character does some action. They maybe say something, then we go into their head, their thoughts, and then we pull back out to an action, a little bit of scene, and then we go into another character. So whenever Virginia Woolf is head hopping, she's kind of going through a pipeline, of like am reorienting the reader at a establishing shot. I'm zooming in to a character, action, dialogue, and then I'm going into the interior thoughts before I bump back out to the scene. Next character, boom, boom, boom. And obviously that's not the only kind of way she does it, but it's one of the very effective ones, and I think it's well worth taking a look at. Anyways, whoever's in the call was someone important. Outside ones were strong. I like this though. I like the menace the driver has just by the fact he's spying. Though I'm sure you have a good plan structure for omniscient / head jumping. It's just notoriously difficult to pull off. I mean, I wish I had a better reason to sort of say, hey, beware omniscient perspectives, just perspectives that can go between characters' internal thoughts. It's just really hard to pull off. Yeah, that's the only caution. cautionary flag I would give. Peter kept looking at his watch and stressed him that Christmas holiday tonight, and most employees heading home for the long break. He kept looking towards the front windshield to get a better sense of how traffic was moving. It was slow, and it was slow and go in the rain. Stop and go? I usually think of that as stop and go. We'll see. P5. Stop and go? I don't think I've heard the expression slow and go, but that might just be my weird, my own, vernacular, I guess. There's no other way to have it in Oregon. Excuse me, sir. I do have something important I need to get to. Do you by chance know how much longer we are until we're back at my office? He was younger. Looked like had been dry cleaning years. He kept looking back at Peter to see if Peter asked him a question. Immediately, you're focused on the call. Okay, so I'm getting a little confused. The driver looked up at the mirror again with a soft smile. Now he's like even more creepy. Peter was younger, or he was younger. Again, the tricky part about head hopping is the driver self-referencing? Is he referencing Peter? And especially the more we move around, the more especially pronouns start to kind of lose clarity in terms of who they're referring to. Is this the driver? He kept looking back to see if Peter would ask him a question and immediately focused on his call, looking out the window. He could see his face appeared somewhat worried about something. I'm sorry, sir. I'm trying to get us past the holiday rush and we're heading to the weekend. I'll try my best to reroute us, okay? And the same worried look on his face began, living his hand across his forehead. Look, Nikki, this is important. Please call for an emergency board meeting tonight. I don't care what you have to do or who's still there. Can you please? Hello, Nikki, are you still there? Peter could hear the voice of his secretary, Nikki, cutting in and out as it continued to rain harder outside. Bad reception? Must be, Peter said as he lowered to see his phone to see the call cut off. Yeah, we're in a tight spot. Don't worry, though. I'll get you to your destination here in a jiff. I know a shortcut. Hey, by the way, what'd you say your name was again? It's Peter. Peter Gerhoff. Instantly, the driver's ears perked up as if it heard winning lottery numbers. He took his eyes off the road to confirm who he was driving. Hey, it's you. I thought it was you, and they told me I was picking up. I couldn't believe it. You're the guy from the medical ads. Yeah, like the driver's space line between paragraph and don't indent new line can work. Set scene. Yep. As you're saying in action. Yep. That's another, good tool, like using some of those, inline breaks or even the three little dots or whatever. But again, it's tricky. And like I would almost that's like, there's very few things I would, say, oh, don't, it's just weird. Omniscience really hard. I mean, it's like one of those things, like, yeah, like it's achievable. You can pull it off. Like, it's sort of like, hey, if someone's, a skier and they're at the top of a double black diamond, you can say, yeah, you can pull it off. Maybe even if they're like a skier who's done blues and greens, yeah, you can pull it off. But like the probability of it not working is high, and so whenever we get into to head jumping to omniscience, at least my flag goes up. Like I, in my own writing, have never done omniscient because I've found it so hard. I probably should make myself do it just to practice and go to the omniscient gym, as it were. But it's tricky. And then, more recently, the way a lot of folks do modern omniscient is sometimes through things like plural narrators and plural point of views. And if you want to see those, you can go to the Final Boss Discord. And I do have a nice reading list of fun. Read omniscient to write it. Yes. But yeah, even then, it's just tough. It's just very finicky. It's like, trying to think. It's like, it's just like cooking something that is like really hard. It's just a pain in the neck and it's really finicky. And it's like, even if you do it right, someone won't get it. Like, and if you're trying to have like mass audience appeal, like with your story, it's just going to make your audience shrink down because there's a percentage of people that no matter what you do, it's just going to be like just not to their taste, right? Anyways, Peter Gerhoff, yep, the guy from the ads. Like, you're that guy from the medical ads. I know you met my wife talks about. Did I tell you? Yeah, you thought you'd be wrong. Your wife told you she was pregnant. Oh man, she's never gonna believe this. You're the CEO of that medical company at such a young age. That's impressive. You're how old? 37, 38? You were in the military before too, right? Airborne guy or something? Question of the question. The driver steering off as if it's idle. And so now we're like pulled out as like the narrator almost, and maybe this is Peter's point of view. Peter's flattering away. The young man took such interest in it. He was trying to grab his attention before the question. Even, what's your name? Peter asked. I'm Alex. Okay, well, Alex, I appreciate the interest, but I would appreciate if you keep your eyes on the road. I'd like to get there in one piece for both our sakes. As soon as he said, Alex calmed his emotion of excitement and focused on the road. Well, sorry, man. Always hard to tell when the rain. It's hard to tell the rain where the line is. I know these roads better than anyone. I grew up here my whole life. No need to worry. You're in good hands. Peter kept looking at the watch. In a nervous tick fashion, 10 minutes had gone by, and still they were not close to the office. He knew he only had a limited time before his employees started heading home, and that he had to make the most of it. It felt like an eternity since he entered the car, and wasn't sure if he would ever make it on time. At the same time, he could hear the faint voice of Alex talking. He opted out of the company car after the meeting since nothing was available and showed notice he would have to deal with an exception. What's the name of your company again? Alex asked. So again, this started more sinister. Like the taxi driver is becoming a little bit more generic fan, which in some senses I see you giving a lot of information, but it's also information we already have. We already know that Promissary is a pharmaceutical company. This is all data we already got from the prescript, right? Um, so yeah, I would say that there's probably a lot of opportunity to bring more conflict into this scene. There is conflict in terms of inconvenience, right? Like, this person's kind of being annoying. Peter's just trying to get to a meeting. There is some conflict there, but the stakes, to my knowledge, are pretty low, right? Like, yes, there's this important meeting he's going to be late to, but whether Alex is annoying or not doesn't seem to impact, his timeliness to the meeting. Um, and so yeah, there's I think a little bit of wiggle room there in terms of, hey, can Alex be a menacing figure? Can he be somebody sent to spy on Peter? Like, nothing is as it seems in this town in Oregon. Excited cab drivers should be, a thing. And then you might say, Jeff, it's coming in 2 pages. But at this point, I think you're already running a little bit late, right? Like, so the reason I'm saying that is we're recapping some of the stuff we've already seen, and if we haven't moved on to the next point of action, the next beat in the story, we're too late, right? Like, if we're spending that extra time recapping. Yep, it's a pharmaceutical company. Yes, and he's giving some exposition over dialogue. Over here, you were in the army. You were. Oh, here we go. Here it is. You're 38 years old. You're in the military, airborne guy. What are you guys working on now? So, like, a lot of these are like valuable questions. Like, they're giving us data about the character, about Peter, but the downside is that they're probably not giving it to us at the right time, for one, right? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, to understand the context of this scene, I don't need to know that he's 37 or 38 or was in the airborne military. Just won't impact the outcome of this scene. Um, it will maybe impact something down the road, and that's when we can bring it up and sort of say, oh yeah, but you don't have to, I think, flag that until it becomes relevant, and maybe that's not relevant for 2 or 3 more chapters, maybe even more into the story. And so a lot of the things that I would consider and I would encourage is sort of saying, hey, really zooming in. And I'll go ahead and write my final notes because it's already getting late, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's sleep schedules. Um, but, so overall, I think the writing style is really good. So, like, the good um, writing style, if I could, I love the description. Use and that you bring in all five senses into creating the scene and environment. Things to like look at. I already talked about summary, like summary. I think the one thing I would really look out at the scene structure level is ensure every scene has a high stakes conflict that progresses into higher stakes as the scene continues and must end with an answer. And this is the old writing adage, yes and no but. So like, yeah, I mean, but it's a really good rule of thumb because it's sort of saying, hey, in order for a scene to have an answer, it has to have a question, which is what's the uncertain thing, right? And is it that uncertain thing something I'm excited to find an answer to, right? Like so far, the uncertain thing in this scene is Peter going to get to the office on time for a board meeting? That's a uncertain thing, so it's good. I've read many scenes where there's, kind of everything's above board. So that is good. I think you're starting off further down the road, but I would also sort of say, hey, why, the question for the reader is, oh, like, is the board meeting really important? Is tonight the night of, blah, 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 where we have to decide tonight, release days tomorrow. Like, what's the thing driving the urgency around that question? And then, answering the question with, an extension, right? Like, there's yes and no. And that's the last scene. Like, the end of your story ends with a yes, the end, or a no, the end. So everything else before then is no, but, or no, and it gets worse. Like so then you say, oh no, he's not going to get to the meeting on time, and therefore he's going to have to delay the product launch another week. And then he's like, okay, can I, make that delay shorter? Can we get our factories to work harder? That's another question that's going to come up from that. And so those are sort of, that precipitation of cause and effect that can, really make scenes come alive is sort of, hey, what's that big question in the scene? What is its short-term answer precipitate in the future, and make a new question that we have to wonder about. But overall, thank you so much for sharing, Carter. This was awesome. I actually am really impressed. I loved a lot of the things you're doing here. I wish I could read, more, but I'm a talker, so I probably talk more. But yeah, let me know if you have questions on kind of some of the stuff I talked through. Happy to go in more detail down the road, but I definitely wanted to at least get a high level on the first few pages, and I always think the first few pages are the most important. They are the make or break. When you look, there's, if you even if you go to Barnes and Nobles, one of the best things I think for a writer to do is to go to Barnes and Nobles and watch, and you'll see someone take a book off the shelf, flip through page 1, flip through page 2, and they're going to do two things after page 2. They're either going to close it, put it back on the shelf, or they're going to close it, put it in their bag, and take it to checkout and buy it at the counter. And so those first 2 pages have to be bomb. They have to be the best thing that at any of our current skill levels as writers that we can create. And so yeah, okay, that's why I'm always in these edits I zoom in much more on the early pages, because that in my mind is where the rubber meets the road in the eventual sale of a book. But anyways, thank you so much for sharing this with me. This was awesome. I'm really curious to see how this writing process develops, your future drafts. And I hope, this kind of perspective is helpful and beneficial. And of course, reach out if you have any questions, and happy to share more. Thanks again. Ta-ta for now.